Well, hello there, and welcome to Beer Christianity. My name is Jonty Langley. I'm actually on holiday from the cruise, so it's just me, though you may hear my wife shout at me occasionally from the other side of this table. I'm on holiday in Wales. I rented a motorhome. It's pretty freaking awesome. Anyway, I'm sitting in a Hungry Horse pub, because I'm classy that way, in Llanelli. Is that how you pronounce it? Llanelli? It's definitely how I feel like you pronounce it, but I don't know shit about Wales or the Welsh language, and I am an immigrant, and that's relevant because we have an election coming up. It's also Remembrance Sunday, and that's also relevant because we have an election coming up. I'm sitting here looking out at a stone church, an edifice built, I think, at the height of British Empire, and I'm sitting in a country that has suffered from the cuts of austerity and has suffered the loss of many of its finest people due to involvement in war. And I think it's about time that, we talk about the larger political issues from a Christian perspective. We should talk about issues like pacifism. We should talk about issues like whether it's a sin to be rich, what we should be doing with our wealth, whether we should have political power, because at a time when you're voting for political parties, I know the temptation is to go, well, none of them really perfectly, exhibit Christ-likeness, so I guess I'm just not going to vote. And I just have to say, please don't not vote. Please don't not vote. The powers of this world want you not to vote. Democracy is a tiny, tiny thing, but it can be really useful. And you at least have a way of changing something in your own small way. So please do vote. But more importantly, because you don't want to hear me chatting over my beer, what you want to hear is Shane Claiborne, who I interviewed 1 year into Obama's presidency, which seems like much simpler times, as Aaron Chris would say. Much simpler times. But yeah, Shane Claiborne, a lovely man. If you don't know him, you do need to check out his book, Jesus for President. He was in this intentional community where they were trying to model a more Jesus way of doing things. Anyway, interviewed him ages back. I asked him on Twitter if it was cool if I could just put this out, and he said, yeah man, whatever, as long as, and so I said I'd make it clear that this was an old interview. So that is what I'm doing, and he's still very cool, and a lot of it is still incredibly relevant. Yeah, it's worth mentioning that the Obama presidency, we're looking at this genuine fascist chump that is Trump, and it's easy to go, oh, Obama, he was perfect, he was lovely because he was well-spoken and he was a liberal. But guys, he accelerated America's assassination program of people who were not in combat, who were civilians, more than any president before him. He's not an unmitigated good guy just because he's civilized in a way that Trump isn't. I think this is a problem that I'm seeing so much in the run-up to this election. Is I'm talking to a lot of my friends, these people who consider themselves centrists and who are actually centrists. I know people who consider themselves centrists and non-centrists. They're just quite otherwise. I'm looking at you, Oliver. and then I know some people who are liberals in the way that communists or anarchists would speak about liberals. Who are really, really concerned about the holidays they have. Who are, I like to think of them as Waitrose Progressives, people who know there's something wrong with the world, but who don't want any major change, because they come from a position where major change isn't necessary, because it really doesn't matter who wins the election, so they can spend their time feeling clever, too clever to vote for a party that might actually help. I think we're in desperate times, and I think it's too important right now to be clever. I think right now we need to be thinking about voting for anyone who will make this world better. And I don't think it's about incremental change at this point myself. The stakes are very, very high, and we could slide into a very, very horrific situation really, really quickly. Anyway, But on the downside, there's also bad things around the corner. Do you know that song by Noel Coward? There are bad things, times just around the corner. Well, you should listen to it. It's fantastic. I can't play music on this because I'm terrified of being sued because capitalism. Anyway, Shane Claiborne is a wonderful man. He has an old interview with him, and it's still incredibly, incredibly relevant. The question of nonviolence and serving in the military as a Christian. Britain, like America, is still involved in a war in the Middle East, and there are a lot of Christians and pastors and all those kinds of people who are over there. My first question would probably be in that context: is it possible for a Christian to love his or her enemy and at the same time try to kill them? You know, the answer seems obvious to me, but is there an argument for it?
Without a doubt, there's an argument for it. I mean, there's a debate, throughout church history around this, and just war theory and everything. And I think what I would say is to begin with the cross of Jesus and the idea that if we want to know what perfect love looks like when it stares evil in the face, we look at the cross. And Jesus is saying, forgive them for they don't know what they're doing. And that, as Corinthians says, doesn't make any sense to the wisdom of the world, And I think even Peter, as Jesus is telling him he's going to die, Peter is totally like, what are you talking about? The Messiah doesn't die. The Messiah comes in and cleans house, brother. And of course Peter picks up the sword, cuts off one of the servant's ears, and Jesus' response is brilliant. He rebukes Peter. I mean, he might have also said, "You've got bad aim, man." But he rebukes Peter and says, "You pick up the sword, we'll die by it." And then he says, "Enough of this." He picks up the ear and heals the wounded persecutor, only to be, taken into their custody. And I think that, when the early Christians, they said when Jesus disarmed Peter, he disarmed every Christian. And you certainly don't see Christians picking up a sword again for hundreds of years. Now, I think that what happened during Constantine and what's happened in church history is you begin to see the distortion of that, that the persecuted become the persecutors, and a lot of times it comes out. Some of the times, I think it comes out of a really genuine sense of redemptive violence that we've got to protect the innocent, and that without a doubt, that's the most compelling argument for violence. Dietrich Bonhoeffer trying to assassinate Hitler. But then, if you see what happened, I mean, as he did that, and incidentally, what happened was he set up, he tried to kill Hitler, and it didn't work, and Hitler went on more convinced than ever before that God had protected him and protected his mission of annihilating the world of Jews, And so I would say on that day, when Bonhoeffer tried to kill Hitler, the cross lost. And the interesting thing is that Bonhoeffer never said what he was doing was noble or holy. I mean, he actually was basically like, I'm getting ready to sin, so don't try to bless what I'm doing, but I don't know what else to do, and I'm willing to face God with this on my hands. That's real different from what I think we hear of blessing bombs and wars and saying this is God's mission, and that's the place where it becomes really dangerous. So at the very least, we should be able to say that if there ever is violence, it is a sin, it is evil. And whether or not there is a necessary evil there, I think is a good and helpful debate. But I would go on to say that that we as Christians should be the hardest people in the world to convince that violence is ever necessary, not the people leading the war drums and calling for the death penalty. And I mean, like, of all people, like, we've been shown grace while we were yet sinners. You know, we see a God that loves evildoers so much that he died for us. You know, how much more grace should we have for those who, like Paul, were terrorists? You know, and so I think that. Yeah. So now, just one more thing on this, because I think it's so important, is that if you look at this, I mean, if you could read the letters, dozens of letters from soldiers that I get, over and over, they feel this collision in who they are as Christians and as military service people. And it is so heartbreaking to hear that, because part of what they've been sold is this idea that serving our country is serving God. And then when they feel the conflict, you end up seeing this sort of massive amounts of mental illness and spiritual illness, you know. And I mean, the suicide rate in the U.S., the New York Times just came out with an article, the suicide rate has just over the amount of people, of soldiers dying from suicide is more than the soldiers dying in combat.
Crazy.
That's an unbelievable statistic, and I can see as I'm reading these letters, you know, why that is, and people are feeling like a lot of times they are living with things that they're being told. Like one of the kids said, "I am dying for we are dying and killing for abstract nouns like freedom and democracy, and yet it doesn't feel like Jesus, and I don't see the world getting any better." So there's so much at stake, and you know, part of why I went to Iraq was because I think we do have to take we have to take violence very seriously. We have to take evil very seriously, and we have to interrupt it. We have to get in the way of it, but we have to get in the way as Jesus did, and we have to believe that folks who have done tremendous evil are not beyond redemption, no matter how bad they are.
A simple question: do you think it's a sin to be rich?
One of the best answers I heard for that question was from Rick Warren, who wrote The Purpose-Driven Life. Yeah. He said, it's not always a sin to be rich. Sometimes you write a book and it sells 1 million copies. But Rick said, it's always a sin to die rich. And I think that's a good answer, you know. And the real question is, as John Wesley said, is not how much we give away, but how much we have left, you know. And so he capped his income off at what would be equivalent to, you know, a few £100 or something, and gave the rest away. And so I think there's beautiful models for that. And I'm a big fan of not being driven by guilt. I think guilt's a terrible motivator, but it's a good indicator sometimes that, you know, are we really loving our neighbor as ourselves? And we need to be set free to do that in a way that God wants us to. And one of my favorite lines from Mother Teresa is when this guy came up to her, like a journalist, he's all starry-eyed, and he's like, "Oh, you're such a saint. I couldn't do what you do for $1 million." And she said, "Well, me neither. I wouldn't do it for $1 million." You know? And I think in that, what you sense is like we're being called, as Jesus said, to life to the fullest. And many of us settle for something short of that. Many of us settle for the American dream or the European dream over God's dream. And you know, that's the real question. Is we say all of these, you know, you hear that mantra that this is a Christian nation, but if you really take the litmus test and you say, how much and how do we look like Jesus, and how do we not look like Jesus, you know, and what is at the heart of God? What is the character of God like? And you read things like the fruits of the Spirit, and you say, do these characterize America?
My perception is that you're skeptical of Christians trying to wield or gain any kind of political power. Is that because you feel that power will always necessarily corrupt us? Power,
I think, is a dangerous thing, and when Jesus is in the desert, of course, he's offered, you know, all of the power of this world by the devil, and the devil says, "It's mine to give, and I'll give it to you." And he doesn't actually question whether or not it's the devil's; he just flat out rejects it, you know. And I think Jesus's power was very peculiar, and that's what I would say is that we have to maintain the peculiar upside down power of Jesus, where he says the rulers of this world lord over people, but we're to wash feet. You know, we're to clean toilets, like that. Like that's where our integrity comes from, and so. You know, everything that Jesus is doing is making a lampoon of our perceptions of power, you know, and of course, Jesus for President, we talk about him riding a donkey into Passover, would be like, you know, the Prime Minister riding a unicycle or something, you know. But he's calling into question, I think, that power. Now, I think that the incredible mystery of it is that as he suffers from that power on the cross, and the cross embodied everything ugly that you can do to someone, and it was Roman power. You know, it was the power of the state alongside the religious, authorities. And when he rises above it, Colossians said he made a spectacle of it. So I think that's always the job of the Christian as we follow Jesus' cross, is to make a spectacle of the power of this world by creatively subverting it. Now, I think that you can do that from both within and without. There are prophets within the imperial courts, and there are prophets like John the Baptist that are voices in the wilderness. But the important thing is that we don't lose the message of the gospel and the distinctiveness of Christian character and virtue as we live that out. So, you know, the early Christians say you can have any job as long as you're willing to get fired at any point, you know. So I have Christians that are in the military that write me letters all the time, and they're saying, can I have this job? You know, like, I feel like I'm trying to serve two masters, and my arms aren't big enough to carry the cross and the sword or the gun, you know? And I think that's a place to go, well, if you're going to be a Christian, you may be a really bad soldier, you know? And if you're a Christian and you become president of the United States, you might get fired within the first month, you know? Because you're commander-in-chief of the biggest military in the world, and you're trying to follow after the one who said if you pick up the sword, you'll die by it, you know? So I talked to a guy yesterday in the States who's running for Congress and stands a really good chance. And this is the exact question he was asking was, can I do it? I mean, he's looking at his campaign finances, and he's going, like, is this really what I should be raising money for? And those are the exact questions I think we should have. And so what I encouraged him was be as shrewd as a serpent and innocent as a dove. Yeah. And for your campaign, like, try to do it in a way that's different and subversive. You know, for every $1 that you raise for your campaign, give $1 to dig wells in another country, and allow that to be a part of your witness. So I think that's the kind of thing. Run your campaign bus off veggie oil, you know, like what? So I think there's all kinds of ways that we can try to not conform to the patterns around us, you know, and that there's certainly a place for people who are changing, who are trying to change the norms of this world so that they conform to the norms of the kingdom of God, and that's part of how we abolished slavery in Europe and in the U.S. And part of what Gandhi said in his movement was it was really, really cool to have people on the street, in neighborhoods at the grassroots that were making homemade clothes, you know, that were sewing and spinning their own clothes. And he said, but you could really see that the movement had spread when there were people in Parliament that had also made their own clothes. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a great invitation, I think.
And for your ordinary citizen who is essentially going to be, engaging with the democratic process, maybe not as much as your average activist, a lot of them, I think, the more they get to know about politics and are informed about it more by movements like yourselves, a lot of them become disillusioned because they realize there's not necessarily that much difference between Labour and Conservative in this country or Democrat and Republican in the States in terms of some of the fundamentals.
So what? Listen, I know that there are some people listening to this who weren't super politically conscious during the time of New Labour, so let me explain. There was a time when the Labour and Conservative parties were very, very similar, because a lot of the right-wing members of the Labour Party were like, hey man, big business and war, we love that shit. And they were super charming, and they made friends with Britpop bands. Do you remember Britpop? Of course you don't, you're too young. But at the time, it was a thing, and New Labour was this thing of like, hey man, we cannot be the douchebags that the Tories are, but we can still be, you know, pro-free markets, pro-capitalism, pro-business, pro-selling off all sorts of things that every citizen used to own to businesses because, hey, it'll be more efficient, because they believed in the kind of free market capitalism that the Tories believed in. It has to be said that the current leadership is less warm to that than perhaps Tony Blair or even Gordon Brown, who I like very much, were. So that's just more like a note of like, you know, when I say, there's not that much between the Labour and the Conservative Party, please understand there's a huge amount between the Labour and Conservative Party, in the same way that there's a huge amount between the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Lib Dems and the Greens. They're all very, very different parties. When somebody says to you, all the parties are basically the same, they're an idiot. You need to know that. They are not smart people, or they have an agenda that is so revolutionary that it is just not fucking useful. And you need to hear that from me. Anyway, sorry for kind of editorializing in the middle of my own interview. Sorry, past Jonty. I apologize, and sorry, past Shane. Please, continue, Johns. Go, Johns. Go.
But if one party is going to give a better deal for the poor or the downtrodden, if one is less likely to go to war than the other, do we have a responsibility, or is it okay to vote for them, even though they're not perfect?
I think that we have an obligation to engage the world that we live in, and to realize that that there are consequences to our action and to our inaction, and to weigh that out, you know. And so one of the ways that I invite people to think of voting is to think of it as damage control, you know, and that we're not necessarily saying this is going to change the world, but sometimes we're saying this is probably going to do the least amount of damage. You know? And that's where I would really say because one of the things we have to maintain is that Christians have a peculiar way of hoping, and so when we've had a real distorted hope, I think, in what's going to change the world. Is it going to be a party or a president? And when, like in my neighborhood, you have Obama posters plastered with the word hope under it. There's a real danger of disappointed hope, you know, because I just came from Israel and Palestine, and in the Palestinian territories, they have billboards with Obama's picture, and they say 1 year later, and we're still waiting for that change.
Yeah.
So there's so many principalities and powers at work that I think we have to realize that this is a huge battle, and our hope lies in nothing less than Jesus. You know, and as the old hymn goes, Jesus' blood and righteousness, all other ground is sinking sand, you know? Yeah. So our hope doesn't lie in the market or Wall Street. Our hope doesn't lie in, America or Europe, but our hope is in Christ, and we're going to align ourselves with whatever will move us closer to that. So if we think that one decision to vote or not to vote is going to, move things closer to God's coming kingdom, then we do that.
That's Shane Claiborne, author of Jesus for President and Red Letter Christians with Tony Campolo, I want to say. I haven't really kept up with him at all. But yeah, Shane Claiborne, we got lots more of that interview still available for future publication. But yeah, until then, that's what you've got. And I think that's a really good starter in terms of thinking about how you want to vote and what Christians should be doing in terms of politics right now in the States, in the UK, and all over the world. Really, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. That's my really exquisite, sophisticated political analysis, guys. There's a lot going on. Anyway, yes. So, do you have any things that you want to comment on? I'd love to actually do an episode where we talk a little bit to people who have been listening and what their thoughts are on that. So what are your thoughts on what Shane has been saying on whether it's okay to be rich, whether it's okay to be violent, whether it's okay to vote? Those are three big questions, I think, generally speaking. I read a thing recently about Jeff Bezos, who is the owner and founder of Amazon, whose new Washington, D.C. home has 2 elevators and 25 bathrooms, and who 2 months ago took away health benefits from his workers in his Whole Foods division in the U.S. And I was having a conversation with a good, nice Christian person recently about this, and I was just like, we have got to tax that motherfucker into the ground. And he was like, yeah, but I mean, it shouldn't be about taxing the rich. It should be about raising, the level of the poor and about, eradicating poverty. And I'm like, yeah, I guess. And then he used the term, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying, well, I'm not naming him, so fuck it. Him, he, she, whatever. He was like, we just mustn't persecute billionaires for this kind of stuff. And I was genuinely, he used the term persecuting billionaires, and he used the term the politics of envy, as if people who are struggling to keep their families together are the ones guilty of sin when their ultimate employer is the one living at that level. Nobody has the right to live at that level while anybody is suffering in poverty. I cannot believe it. I don't want to tell you what to believe. I want you to read that thing in Amos, in the book of Amos. The book of Amos is brutal. And it talks about the rich sitting in their nice stone houses, drinking their cool drinks while the poor suffer, and what will happen to them. And let me tell you, friend, you haven't heard a class war until you've read that. Yeah, I don't know. It just made me think a lot of this discussion about that, especially on Remembrance Sunday, where we're talking about the First World War, which was not about righteousness, which was about 2 empires fighting each other, and the poor of each nation sent to kill each other in the most horrific way. And the way that was resolved, resulting directly in the horrors of the Second World War and the Holocaust and all that sort of stuff. And just allowing the cancer that is anti-Semitism to grow in Europe and all those sorts of things. That's what I'm saying is Merry Christmas, people. What I'm saying is Happy New Year. This is a really, really fun podcast. Anyway, the point is, I'm sorry that got so dark. Shane Claiborne, he's cool, no? You should follow him on Twitter. I don't know what his handle is, but our handle is beerexianity on Twitter, so you should check us out. You can also email us. So far, literally nobody has at beerchristianity@yahoo.com. And you can also follow us at beerchristianity.libsyn.com if you want to find all of our stuff. We're on Spotify, we're on Twitcher, I always say Twitcher, it's Stitcher, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on a lot of things like that. So do follow us, do rate us and review us and share us with your friends. I say us, it's me tonight, but usually we have Ben and Laura at least joining us. So we got a cool literature episode coming up. We're also trying to organize a live in front of a crowd kind of thing that should be coming up this month or next month in Oxford. So if you're around there, do tweet at us to let us know that you'd be interested in coming along. And if you have any ideas for the format, that'd be cool as well. We're looking at finding somebody cool to interview and then kind of, frankly, fucking freestyling it. So, that's what we're going to be doing. Thanks so much for listening to Beer Christianity. Thanks for tuning in, as it were. And I hope you'll catch us soon, probably with some more Shane Claiborne stuff, but also with some of that literature stuff, and ideally with a live one, maybe about sports. Do you like sports? If you do like sports, then we'll be sportsing all over the next one. So, thanks for listening. Also, if an election happens before you hear the next one, please vote righteously. Please vote as if you're voting for people who have less power than you. Please vote as if Jesus Christ himself cares about who you vote for, because he does, I think, in that, not because he's fundamentally invested in democracy. I'm not sure I believe that at all, but because he cares about how we use our influence and our power, whatever it is, to help the people around us. It's not all you have to do in a democratic society, but it's the very least you can do is vote well. So please do. Thanks for listening to Beer Christianity. Adieu.